Really, AJ? You're supposed to be cleaning your room right now. We agreed that you could only watch all the Captain Durag movies if
I beg your
There's a
pardon?
new Captain Durag sequel coming out on Friday, and you need to watch all.
Representation and authorship are not the same thing. A black character on screen is not the same as a black creative leadership behind the screen. When that leadership and authorship changes, the tone changes, the depth of the characters change, and ultimately the intent changes as well. In the world of animation, where every frame is a deliberate choice and every line of dialogue is a calculated beat, the off-screen senses is everything. The creators are the architects of the show's soul. When those architects are removed, the building might still stand, but it no longer feels like a home. So today, we're unpacking why the black vision in animation is so fragile and what happens to art when the original creative leadership is filtered through corporate pipelines. Let's get into it. The Boondocks was created by Aaron McGruger, and from the beginning, it carried his fingerprints. The show did not just make jokes about race, it dissected racial politics. It interrogated American hypocrisy, it critiqued black celebrity culture, white liberalism, capitalism. It was confrontational in a way that felt intentional, not reckless. And even when the show was crazy at times, there was scaffolding underneath the chaos. Seasons 1 through 3 operated like layered essays disguised as cartoons. They blended satire with character development, and they allowed space for subplots and guest appearances that were pointed rather than random. The humor did not solely rely on shock value or language, it relied on commentary. Then came season 4. McGruger was no longer involved in production. In reports and interviews around that time, reference production tension and scheduling pressure. Now, animation is slow. A single episode could take months. Multiply that by a full season order and you have an intense pipeline. Now add outsourcing, corporate oversight, and network deadlines, and you have a pressure cooker. According to industry chatter and fan discussions, there were expectations around writing output and turnaround speed that clashed with the pace required to maintain the show's depth. When creative control shifted, production continued without the original architect, and the result felt different. Fans did not need insider information to sense it. Online reactions described the season as losing its identity. The social commentary felt less precise, and the satire lost its bite. Plots felt thinner, and subplots that once enriched the world disappeared. Multiple people described it as the show becoming another version of another long-running animated comedy with black slang layered over it. They called it Black Family Guy. Earlier seasons used satire to interrogate power structures. The 4th season often leaned into spectacle. Instead of dismantling cultural phenomena with layered critique, some episodes pushed into grotesque exaggeration. The Kardashian episode in particular frequently appears in discussions as an example of writing that aimed for shock without constructing a sharper critique underneath. The difference was not about animation quality, it was about authorship. McGruder's absence left a vacuum in tone and worldview, and when the person who defines the moral and political compass of a show leaves, it's a structural change. Now, it's important to understand the mechanics here. Animation is expensive, it is time extensive, it often involves overseas studios, executives demand consistency, and networks demand deadlines. And when corporations treat art like content, the pressure increases tenfold. Fans discussing season 4 often reference the production environment. Some point out that Russian art undermines quality, others mention how animation outsourcing can create friction between vision and final output. A creative showrunner who insists on refining scripts and polishing satire slows the pipeline. A corporation focused on delivery may see that as inefficiency, but art takes time, satire takes reflection, cultural critique takes precision. When that time is compressed, complexity suffers. And when the creator most invested in that complexity is removed, the show becomes vulnerable to tonal drift. Diversity in the animation industry has historically lagged behind live action. While entry-level diversity is slowly improving, greenlight power, which is basically the ability to approve projects or finalize script changes, remains heavily concentrated. This creates a filtering effect where a black creator might pitch a nuanced, culturally specific joke, but if the people in the approval chain don't get it, the joke is either cut or translated into something more universal, which is often corporate code for palatable to a white audience. Now let's step back to the 1970s and examine Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. Now, I know Bill Cosby got some controversy, but we're not talking about him specifically, it's more of the show. Now, the show was groundbreaking in representation. It centered black kids, it portrayed friendship, learning, and community, and it aimed to uplift and educate. For many viewers, it was affirming. It normalized black childhood in a medium that had rarely done so. Yet, the animation industry at the time was overwhelmingly white, controlled at the executive and production levels. Retrospective analysis point out that the show emphasized moral lessons in a way that aligned with mainstream acceptability. It avoided deeper systemic critique, and it presented a contained version of black life that was positive and instructive, but not structurally confrontational. This dynamic does not erase the show's importance. It reveals how the power shapes storytelling boundaries. When a black narrative must move through white-controlled systems, some edges are softened, some themes are redirected towards universal comfort, and the filtering becomes part of the final product. Now let's move on to a show with no universal comfort. A show that's offensive to everyone that ever lived on Earth, and a show that needs to be annihilated from the human consensus and human mind, and it should be destroyed and burned in the fire. I think we all know what I'm talking about.
At least they ain't got that drug dealing baby under my roof no more.
Man, my mouth ready for some milk right now.
Good Times originally functioned as a live-action sitcom grounded in working-class reality. It portrayed economic struggle and addressed systematic barriers. The humor existed alongside serious social commentary. The animated revival, however, operated in a different tonal space, to say the least. Reviews of the modern adaptation note that it leans into surreal exaggeration and absurdity. The grounded realism of the original shifts towards spectacle. Now, animation offers freedom, and exaggeration is part of its language. The concern arises when the emotional grounding that defined the original narrative dissolves under new creative leadership. The systematic critique fades into background noise. The family dynamic becomes more chaotic and less materially grounded. That tonal shift mirrors what happened in other examples. When authorship changes, emphasis changes. Alright, so this is Editor Ray in the building, and I just noticed, like, at this moment, I realized that some people could misconstrue my whole argument and say, "Oh, well, Good Times, they had a black that was the writer, so like that makes everything good. Your whole argument is dog shit." Let me clarify myself to these specific motherfuckers. Now, we understand that the production was led by black leadership, including showrunner Renata Shepard and executive producer Steph Curry. However, having black creators at the top does not automatically protect the show from industry pressure. The series was developed within a specific adult animation pipeline, pioneered by studios like Fuzzy Door, which prioritize a specific style of comedy, fast-paced, cynical, and reliant on shock value. When black writers are placed in this environment, they are forced to adapt their storytelling to fit a pre-existing corporate template. And in the end, the project felt less like an authentic black narrative and more like a standard corporate comedy with a black cast layered over. So if you motherfuckers think that just because you have a Negro at the helm, that the structure beneath it is not white, miss me with that shit. Alright, back to the video. And another prime example of that is, of course, The Cleveland Show. Family Guy's Cleveland Brown transitioned from a supporting character to a lead, and the show centered a black family in primetime animation. Yet the creative structure remained within a framework shaped largely by white showrunners extending a established comedic style. And the cultural awareness felt lighter than it could have been. Cleveland sometimes felt defined by reactions rather than interior complexity. The representation was present, but authorship was not centered in the same way. However, as we move deeper into 2026, the pattern is finally being challenged by a new wave of black creative leadership. We are seeing what happens when the black vision is not just present, but protected. The massive success of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse served as a sort of turning point. It proved that cultural authorship is a financial and critical powerhouse. It's an expression of Miles Morales' Afro-Latino experience. It uses graffiti textures, specific frame rates for different characters, and a soundtrack that is woven into the narrative's DNA. It wasn't just diversity. It was an artistic vision that required leaders like Kemp Powers in the room to defend non-universal choices. Following this lead, 2026 has become a landmark year for original Black IPs. Projects like Iyanu, rooted in Yoruba culture and Nigerian mythology, are breaking through major platforms like Cartoon Network and HBO Max. Iyanu is produced by Lionforge Entertainment, a Black-owned studio that maintains control from script to stream. And this ensures that the cultural nuances, the language, the music, the historical references are not translated or softened for a perceived general audience. When the architect becomes the firm, the structural integrity of the satire or the realism remains intact. When Black creators anchor the vision, storytelling tends to carry layered social awareness, political sharpness, and cultural nuance. When creative control shifts or becomes filtered through systems without sustained Black leadership, tonal drift appears. Satire becomes broader, realism becomes stylized, cultural critique becomes safer, and characters become flanderized. Authorship ultimately determines just how deeply a show interrogates its own themes. A creator rooted in the culture being depicted brings lived understanding, internal critique, and historical context. Without that anchor, shows can drift towards surface level engagement. This is not about restricting collaboration. It's about recognizing that sustained cultural storytelling requires sustained cultural leadership. Corporate systems prioritize speed and scalability. Cultural storytelling requires patience and specificity. When those priorities collide, the outcome reflects which value wins. Black showrunners remain unrepresented in animation leadership roles, but that is changing. And as we see in 2025 and 2026, when the right people are in that room, the vision is never lost. Talk to y'all later.
Waiting.